Well, the problem is that all of this makes a lot of sense if you're living in the land of ideology. If you never touch grass, as the kids say,
Yeah.
then sure, all of this looks really, really good. I mean, you have entire sectors of academia that are saying that children need to be liberated. We need a children's liberation movement. But of course, who are they going to be liberated from? It's the parents, right? They see this because, sure, there's incidents where kids are controlled or abused, sometimes by parents. The problem is that in this world of reality that we're actually living in, parents are the most connected to, invested in, and protective of kids. And if you're going to liberate children from their parents, you don't liberate them from oppression and control and abuse. You simply transfer the abuse and the control, and very, very often, that matrix of genuine oppression to another entity that maybe doesn't even know the kid's name, and certainly was not there when they were waking up at 4 a.m. with a fever and needing, comfort and care. So this whole thing just gets both children and parents wrong. And it can come from people that are supposedly well-meaning. It's just they're not in contact with reality at all.
Okay, and that's a piece I wanted to focus down on, because I think this is really, really important. I can remember having a conversation with a college professor before I dropped out of college. And he'd asked us to present our fantasy scenario for society. Okay, his name was Rudy. He was a really nice guy, super nice guy. Really liked him. He was kind of making an impression on me. And one day I asked him, hey, well, Rudy, you've never shared yours. You had us write all these papers. What's yours? And he said, well, my ultimate goal for society, or my fantasy society, is everybody would be paid the same thing, no matter what you did. So a surgeon would be paid the same thing as someone who cleans up after the surgeon. And I sat there dumbfounded, and I said, well, but then we'd have too many people who are, let's say, tearing tickets at movie theaters. He goes, what do you mean? I go, if I'm paid the same money to stand there and get free movies and tear a piece of paper, I don't think I'd pursue what it would take to become a surgeon. And he got very, very offended at me. And I'd pierced that veil, that living in theory veil. But if I look at a Tim Waltz, or I look at a Cammie Harris, or I look at a Gavin Newsom, or I look at a Jay Inslee, those people are mendacious and there's great evil done through them. But when you're sitting on a panel with an academic and they present this to you, I don't want to make this across the board, but do you get any sense at all that they have any empathy for parents in this situation? No?
No, and here's the thing, it's not just the panelists, right? It is really the elites that are, you can make fun all you want of JD Vance's, child as cat ladies, quip. But I know that at the G8 summit a couple of years ago, you looked at all the different world leaders, especially across Europe, and hardly any of them had children. We really are in a place where these people aren't even touching grass when it comes to their own front yard with their own children. And so they just don't have as many opportunities to actually see what's the world really like. And then what happens is when you actually have your own child, you go, oh, wait a second. Nobody's going to touch this kid. But if you don't have your own kids, and that is the problem, we are largely merging into a society that is free of marriage. And if you're free of marriage, you're often free of children as well. But even the people who are getting married often aren't having their own kids. So it's very hard to understand how somebody could want the best for their kids when wouldn't it be easier if the state just decided? Really, that's where the problem is the top policy leaders that think they know better for kids than their own parents.
So well said. I read a fascinating statistic, and it is that in big cities, they're seeing a net decrease in population. A lot of that is outflow, but another part of it is people are not having kids in the big cities. And families are relocating to the suburbs or leaving the blue states for the redder states. They're taking their kids with them and having more kids. So it is creating this environment, this bifurcation in the country, which is another form of balkanization. And I want to ask you about that. And I want to ask you about the why. We've talked about the who, but is there a why beyond, oh, it seems like a good idea? Is there a more obvious, nefarious end game? And we'll talk with Katie Faust about this. She's the author of a new book we'll talk about now on pro-child politics, and a very successful author and a very, very dear friend of ours. We'll get Katie's answer. I'll remind you something that you can do in your own home, your business, your car, your truck, your college dorm, your cabin. You do not have to live with the that's bad smells of, let's say, a cabin filled with a whole bunch of adolescents. Lovely kids, love them, but not always the most hygienic people. You can plug into the wall, take it with you wherever you go. It's called the Thunderstorm 2. It's from Eden Pure Deals. It produces ozone in the room, and that ozone molecules, the O3 molecules, bond to the bad smells. They negate them. It actually works with viruses as well. This thing is so potent, you will begin to have your room smell like a thunderstorm about 3 minutes after you plug it in. And it can get you whole home coverage right now in a buy one, get one free offer. These things are silent. They don't have air filters. You'd have to replace the air filters every year. You wipe it off with a warm cloth once in a while. Go to EdenPureDeals.com. Use code ToddBogo. Buy one, get one. That's EdenPureDeals.com. Use ToddBogo. Buy one, get one. Have the same thing that we have in this studio here. So, Katie, with that as preface, you've seen the same statistics that the cities are becoming these childless places. And as they get that, they're getting more and more political bulk. The suburbs are becoming the place for families. And we're seeing, again, a balkanization and a splitting in the country. I happen to think there are people on top of Kamala Harris and around her and around the figurehead who want this to happen because it's divide and conquer. It's a color revolution. What do you think the why is on people doing this to families and to kids?
This is actually the thing that nobody's talking about that everybody should be talking about. Yes, definitely the sorting that's going on within the United States between red and blue, whether that's cities or states, but the actual population dearth, the population spiral that we as a country are in, more than 70% of the world's population lives in countries that are not replacing themselves. It is a major excuse for immigration policy, bad immigration policy. So actually, my next book, Pro-Child Politics, which looks at every political issue through the lens of what is best for kids, we've got 7 different chapters that touch on why is it that people are not having kids. One reason is the economy. Right? Chris Bedford of The Blaze writes our economy chapter and talks about why economics is set up against families and just ordinary Americans. We've got our environment chapter written by Chris Barnard of the American Conservative Coalition, and he's a conservative environmentalist, talking about how environmental policy and the ways we talk about climate has scared young people out of having children. And that's a huge part of them not choosing not to have kids of their own. We've got a chapter written on taxes by Grover Norquist. We've got Phil Kerpen wrote our debt chapter, the ways that we are using our entitlements and the ways that we are structuring our taxes de-incentivizes people having families. We've got a chapter written on masculinity by the president of Promise Keepers, who talks about how the denigration of manhood makes it harder for men to form families. And then Peachy Keenan of Domestic Extremist fame wrote our feminism chapter. We're lying to women about the importance of marriage and family and telling them that career is what is going to fulfill them. So there's so many forces that are working against ordinary people forming and maintaining families and choosing to have children. And unfortunately, so many of those messages are coming directly from the left.
Okay, so is a why, and I love the layout of the book and the experts, and there's a link to get in front of getting this book for yourself and in the show notes. Make sure that you do that. All these books are worthwhile. The entire trio now of books from Katie. The why, is it tied to a desire to have fewer humans? Because they tell us that. I mean, Katie, they come out and say we need 7.5 billion fewer people. So they're backfilling, you're saying, through this mass illegal immigration. It is illegal. We're not checking who these people are. We see the riots in the UK, the riots in Ireland. The Troubles are back. I can't even believe I'm watching the Troubles in Belfast, where troops are saying, we're going to use impact rounds if you continue to protest the theft of farms and houses and schools from you for the newcomers. And it doesn't help the newcomers to come and be absolutely resented. So is part of this a desire to have fewer humans?
Well, definitely there's segments of the climate alarmists that have said depopulation is a huge part, a huge plank in their goals. Yeah. And that absolutely deserves some of the blame. But that's not everything. I mean, the way that we think about what it means to be human in terms of life and men and women and marriage, the importance of marriage as an institution to advance social thriving, all of these have been under attack. Obviously, the way we are structuring the economy to de-incentivize small businesses and reward these mass conglomerates. I mean, there are so many ways that are stacking the deck against ordinary men and women coming together and creating their own mini society. So you have to do it against all odds. And I understand why people are fleeing the cities, because I'll tell you what, it's really hard to live in an expensive city and try to raise kids.
Well, it's hard to live in an expensive city, but it's also scary. And I've seen people there are Seattleites to this day and San Franciscoites and Los Angelites and people live in these cities who will post, I don't recognize the city you guys talk about. Yeah. I don't recognize I don't see the high crime. I've never been afraid in my city. But I look at that class of people and almost universally they're a laptop class that almost universally works at home. And if they're not working at home, they're almost universally in an Uber from a home to a building dropped off. They do not have to do this. And I was the other day with someone, and we were setting up to have a workout in the park, and we're planning for this workout at this lake. And when we were walking around, we just found some glass. Well, there's glass. And I said, you know what? In Seattle, people check the playgrounds and soccer fields for needles. And there were people saying, wait, what? Right. No, this is a ritual. You do this.
Yeah.
And so as people are moving out of these areas, that's also an anti-crime or an anti-child policy, pro-crime, right? Do you guys cover that at all? Do you cover crime?
Oh, baby. Our mutual friend, Ari Hoffman, wrote an entire chapter on policing and why policing is actually a matter of justice for children. And of course, I got somebody in Seattle to do it because Seattle is the place where they tested so many of these wild, destructive leftist theories. And we got to see how it worked out firsthand. And how did it work out? It died. I mean, right. People died.
Right. And people, well, not just died, but are murdered and I mean, all sorts of forms of death.